Union boss Paul Howes has warned that the Australian union movement could be wiped out if it has to deal with another HSU-style scandal. The warning comes as the ACTU begins its conference in Sydney this morning. Political reporter Latika Burke joins us now from Sydney. Good morning, Latika.
Good morning, Karina. Well, I'm at the Sydney Convention Centre in Darling Harbour, where about 1,000 union delegates from all the unions will gather for the next 3 days to vote on various rules governing unions. Now, of course, the HSU has been kicked out of the ACTU, but it's fair to say that what has happened with that union will be a presence overshadowing this entire gathering. Joining me to discuss this is the AWU boss, Paul Howes. Paul Howes, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Thanks,
on ABC. So how critical will be changing the face of unions and union governance here?
Well, we've got a very proud story to tell for the Australian Labor movement. We've achieved many gains over the last 3 years since we last met as Congress. We've got a pretty ambitious agenda going forward to ensure that working men and women have their voice heard at the tables of power. But obviously there are issues concerning what's happened with the Health Services Union in terms of overshadowing the outcomes of many of the gains that we've won. But ultimately, Congress will still be focused on the day-to-day business of ensuring that the working men and women of this country have a strong voice and they have effective unions gaining the outcomes that they deserve.
You've warned that another HSU scandal could derail the entire movement. How angry are you then at the HSU and those members that you believe responsible for this?
Well, I'm not angry with the members of the HSU. I think the members of the HSU have been betrayed by a small bunch of individuals in that union who have clearly used that organisation as a personal piggy bank. All of us in the wider Labor movement are furious and disappointed with what those officials within the HSU have done, because ultimately it has derailed and got off message the good work that Australian unions have been doing in this country for 150 years.
You, like many other Australians, watched the Labor MP Craig Thomson's interview on Saturday. Do you believe his denials?
No, I don't.
Why not?
Well, I read the Fair Work Australia report. It was pretty clear. I've dealt with Fair Work Australia as a regulatory body in my role as the head of the Australian Workers Union. I know they're a diligent and pretty strict regulatory authority. I think the Fair Work Australia report is pretty clear. Now, ultimately, it's up to the courts and the prosecuting authorities to decide what happens with Craig Thomson. But frankly, I just don't think it passes a believability test.
Do you think that the Labor government would have dealt with Craig Thomson differently if it wasn't a minority government?
Well, Blind Freddie can tell you that. I mean, of course, that's the reality. But ultimately, the government and no party should be responsible for removing an MP from Parliament. There's a thing called democracy in this country, and ultimately it's up to the courts and the prosecuting authorities to decide what happens with Craig Thomson. I want to ensure that the union movement gets back on track and we aren't too distracted by what's happened within the Health Services Union. That's why I supported Dave Oliver and Jeff Lawrence and Jed Carney when they moved to suspend the HSU from affiliation with the ACTU. That's why our union will vote in support of tougher governance and regulatory requirements for the governance of trade unions. But ultimately, I do want to see that those who were responsible for the corrupt activities that occurred within the Health Service Union to be brought to account.
Last week, Dave Oliver spoke as though Tony Abbott would be the next Prime Minister. Do you share his sense of inevitability?
Well, I think the polls show you that the Labor government's going to be in a very tight race, and the union movement in this country has been around for 150 years, and we've dealt with a lot of Conservative governments during that period, and a lot of Conservative governments that wanted to wipe us off the face of the earth because they've wanted to ensure that they could work with business to drive down wages and conditions in this country. That's what we saw with work choices, a deliberate attempt by the former coalition government to delegitimise the role of unions in our workplace so they could drive down wages and conditions, cut penalty rates, cut overtime, and destroy our safety net system, which has governed Australian workplace for over 100 years. Ultimately, unions have to prepare for any electoral possibility, and I think Dave Oliver today will outline a pretty ambitious agenda to not only campaign to ensure that Labor is re-elected, but also if we see an Abbott government to ensure the union movement fights what will clearly be an agenda from the Liberal Party to reintroduce a lighter version of work choices.
There's been a lot of talk about union memberships declining in the wake of the HSU scandal. Are you therefore prepared for a Tony Abbott government in terms of your membership?
Well, the union movement hasn't declined in raw numbers. The ABS statistics out just a couple of weeks ago showed an increase in overall union membership in terms of raw numbers. And in fact, we've had about 2 million members for the last 2 decades. The raw numbers haven't changed that dramatically. The issue for unions is the decline in density. We represent about 20% of the workforce today, and our issue is breaking into those new parts of the economy where you haven't had a history or a tradition of strong unionised workplaces, and that's a challenge that the union movement across the globe faces. But the union movement today has shown, as we did in 2007, that we are a disciplined and we are a campaigning and pretty fit fighting organisation. We're not going to let a few rotten apples spoil the whole barrel, because we've got a very proud and strong legacy and history of standing up for the rights of working men and women for 150 years.
But Paul Howes, it's fair to say you're preparing for a Tony Abbott-led government, and the HSU might have played its part in helping create that?
Look, I think I'm preparing for a Julia Gillard-led government. I'm preparing for a Tony Abbott-led government. I'm preparing for
What about a Kevin Rudd-led government?
Peter Costello-led government. Who knows what's going on in the coalition? The union movement, governments come and go. The union movement remains. And we have been, as I said, in existence for 150 years. The AWU is older than the nation itself. And we always prepare for all outcomes. I think ultimately the Labor government's got a very good message and a very good record to sell. I think the budget has shown that they are standing up for the interests of ordinary, decent, hard-working Australians. It's the same message that the union movement has. We're sick of the mining boom only working for the Clive Palmers, the Twiggy Forrests, the Gina Rineharts. We want to see the mining boom work for all Australians. We want to see a fair redistribution of the wealth, the amazing wealth that's being created in this country at the moment, so we can help our ailing trade-exposed industries in manufacturing and services and so on. I think if the government sticks to their message, as we've seen in Newspoll today, I think the voters will return, because they'll see that they've got a government that's in their corner, and they've got people like Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan who are not fighting for the interests of the billionaires like Tony Abbott is, but they're fighting for the interests of the millions of Australians who go to work each day, work hard and struggle to make ends meet.
Paul Howes, thank you for joining us on ABC Breakfast.
Thanks, Latika.